Chapter 9. The opening. By late afternoon, the place had stopped looking new. Not because anything had dulled, not because the paint had softened or the boards had settled or the gravel had lost its brightness. It was because people had begun to move through it. And once that happened, it no longer looked like something waiting to be used. It looked like it belonged to the life already forming around it. The 3 cottages stood in a row behind the diner, their lights still unlit against the long gold of the evening. Each one settled into its places, though it had always meant to be there. The gravel lot stretched wide and pale beside them. The small playground stood a little beyond, simple and sturdy, already holding the look of something that would be worn smooth by hands, and shoe sand the steady repetition of use. Beyond all of it, the diner watched over the evening the way it watched over everything. Its 2 stories warm in the falling light, the upstairs apartment windows catching the sun before the glow would begin inside. Nothing about it felt formal. Nothing had been arranged to be looked at. The tables set up outside had been carried out because they were needed. The extra chairs had appeared because people were already coming. The long folding surfaces Noah and Pete had set across Sahar dishes covered in towel sand foil and wax paper, bowls of salad, pans of beans, platters of sliced tomatoes, trays of biscuits, cakes under glass domes, pies waiting in the kitchen until there was room to bring them out. The smoke from the grill drifted low and soft through the air behind the diner. Somewhere near the back steps, a radio played low and odd hat. It never tried to take over the evening, just enough for the music to exist inside it. People arrived the way people did when they had not been so much as welcomed. Not all at once, not ceremonially. They came in pickup sand set in sand, old cars that rolled slowly over the gravel and stopped at angles nobody worried about correcting. Doors opened. Children climbed up before the engines were even fully off. Women stepped around to gather bowls from back seats and covered dishes from laps. Men came carrying lawn chairs from truck beds. If they had assumed from the beginning there would be reason to stay. Every arrival altered the place a little more. A voice here, a laugh there, a car door, a child calling to another child, the drag of a chair being set down, the screen door at the diner opening and closing and opening again. Inside, the diner stayed busy in its own way, not full for supper exactly, but alive with motion. The counter held 2 men drinking coffee over pie. They had claimed they did not have room for and then eat anyway. Someone moved through for extra forks. Someone else came in looking for ice. Margaret passed in and out with the calm rhythm of someone who had no intention of becoming the center of anything, carrying what needed carrying, checking what needed checking, answering whatever quiet question came her way without ever seeming hurried. She wore no special expression. She did not stand back and admire. She moved through the evenings, though this too was part of the work. Only once, when she came out with a fresh stack of plates and saw 3 little girls already racing one another from the cottages, the swing set and back again, did she pause long enough for Noah to notice. He was standing beside the grill turning meat, with one hand, a dish towel thrown over his shoulder, answering something Pete had said without looking away from the heat. Margaret stopped a few feet from him and looked out across the yard, at the children, at the tables, at the cottage doors opening and closing, at a pair of women stepping into the nearest cottage with the kind of curiosity people allowed themselves when something had just become real. At Oscar, who had been near the playground a moment earlier and was now somehow halfway across the lot talking to a man by the second cottages. If he had always had business there. Noah looked at her then. She did not say anything. She did not need to. He looked out too, then back at the grill, and smiled once to himself. That was all. Pete moved through the gathering with the easy confidence of someone who never seemed to be in charge, always, somehow, was helping things hold together anyway. One minuta was carrying a cooler to the edge of the tables. The next was steadying one end of a bench while two boys argued about where it ought to go. Then he was laughing with one of the older men from town near the lot, one hand in his pocket, head bent slightly as though the conversation mattered in auto here properly. Lois moved differently, but with the same effect. She brought order without making it look like order. Plates appeared where they were needed. Napkins reappeared before anyone noticed they had run low. Someone's child had sauce on both hands and no mother in sight. And Lois was already there with a damp cloth and no hint of fuss in her face. The two families did not look joined for the evening. They look at us, though they had been functioning, that way long and not had, no one thought to name it. Jack came through the back door of the diner carrying a tray of bottled drinks and set them down at the end of the table before anyone had to ask where more were. He had grown into movement, way he had grown into work, quietly, without any need for notice. There was something steadier in him now than there had been when the idea of all this first took shape. Not older exactly, just more certain where to step. Reached for the opener fixed to the side of a crate and began popping caps, Lucifer the younger kids, passing bottles into waiting hands before they could lose patience. Georgia took hers with both hands and darted off immediately. Virginia accepted hers with more dignity than the moment required and stayed just long in auto. Tell him she had seen somebody already running across the bridge on the playground structure even, though Margaret had said not to climb the top rail. Jack told her that was because Margaret had been right. Virginia considered that, then left with the drink anyway. A minute later Caroline came out the diner dorkerying. A Bolsh should probably have left for someone else, and Jack took it from her without looking surprised to see her. You didn't have to carry that. I was already holding it. Set it down between two platters and straightened the serving spoon inside it. That doesn't make it lighter. It got here. Looked at her then. She looked back at him. And both of them smiled in a way that belonged to no performance scene, needed no audience. Continuing. As the light lowered, the evening widened. The first cottage filled and emptied in turnses. People stepped inside to see it, not with the careful, quiet reverence of a museum, but with the warm curiosity reserved for places someone might actually sleep, read, wake up in. They looked at the small sitting area opened the curtains to see the light through them, commented on the shelves, noticed the bed, noticed the neatness, noticed the painting on the wall Margaret's, set where it gave the room something more than completion. The second cottage took its turn next, then the third. Someone laughed from inside one of them, not because anything was funny exactly, but because delight sometimes came out that way when it arrived unexpectedly. Children ran in and out tin loops that no longer had any clear beginning. A game formed and changed and dissolved into another one without explanation. The playground held 3 children, then 6, then one alone pumping her legs high on a swing, then a whole cluster again. The sound of chains moving, feet against packed dirt, small voices rissing and breaking apart drifted through everything else like part of the evenings. Whether Oscar moved through it, all without hesitation. No one had to place him anywhere. He was not left at the edge of anything waiting to be included. He crossed from the playground to the nearest cottage, stood in a doorway talking earnestly to a woman from church about where the lamp had come from, then turned up beside Pete near the Grillas, if he had business there too. He carried buns to the table with both hands and all the care of an entrusted task, then disappeared toward the swings, then reappeared on the diner steps with a cookie already half gone, then stood under the cottage Evis-looking Upas. The first porch lights came on. There was nothing uncertain in him. The place did not make room for him. It already had room. That was the difference. Continuing, Jack found himself beside Caroline Agin without planning to. She was standing near the edge of the yard watching Georgia insist on being pushed higher in the swing by Virginia, who was already tired of doing it. You look like you're thinking. I am. That usually means trouble. She turned her head toward him. That's an unfair reputation. It's not a reputation if I've seen it myself. You've seen me think. I've seen what tends to follow. Her smile came slowly. He leaned one shoulder against the swing frame post. What's the verdict? She looked out over the evening Agin before answering. It feels like it was always here. Yeah, he said. It does. Georgia finally abandoned the swing. Virginia wandered off. The one nearest them stayed empty. Caroline stepped toward it and sat down. Jack sat beside her. For a while they did nothing more than move gently back and forth. The noise of the gathering went on around them. Children laughing, voices calling, music drifting, light stretching across the ground, neither of them in a hurry. You know, she said, I think Georgia has eaten 3 pieces of cake. Only 3. She stopped counting after the second. That's probably wise. A Whilish turned her head toward him. He looked back 1 breath, maybe 2. No surprise. No hesitation. Only the momentary. Jack leaned toward her. So did Caroline. And when he kissed her, it was soft, simple, and sure, like something that had belonged to the evening from the beginning. Continuing, the whole place went on being itself. Laughter, music, voices drifting, the diner glowing. Cottage lights steady, children still moving. Margaret stood near the back steps watching the yard. Noah came beside her. It's different with people in it, she said. Yes. That was all. Night came softly. The sky deepened, the air cooled, families began to leave. Not quickly, not all at once. One, then another. Still the place held warmth. Still, the lights stayed on. Still, a few people lingered. Jack and Caroline rose from the swing set, walked back. Oscar fell into step beside them, talking about cottage sand, lantern sand, what should happen next. By the time the last tables were being cleared, the yard had taken on the tender look of a plaza that had been well used and not yet put back in order. A cup left behind, a napkin in the gravel, one swing still moving, the cottages glowing quietly, the diner door opening once more, then closing. Margaret stood for one last moment before turning in. The evening was finishing, but the place was no longer waiting. It had been lived in. And because of that, when the last voices faded and the yard gave itself over to lamplight and quiet, the place did not feel empty. It felt inhabited, not just by people, by use, by memory already beginning. What they had built no longer stood behind the diner like a finished project. It stood there like part of the